everybody. Hope you're doing marvelously well. I have the distinct pleasure of talking to, I was going to say old friend, but that makes, we're both still teenagers, so I won't say old, but a good friend of mine, Miss Susanna Hoffs. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Warren?
I'm doing rather marvelous. Thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I really appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure.
We were talking earlier about how we were doing demos for you. What was it? It was basically like an archway.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Remember, you had to go up this staircase, and it was the driveway through the old swing house, and it was the archway above. And it was like in this tiny little room, and I had like the version whatever of Pro Tools.
because Brad Wood, who we're both friends with, went on to produce the record version of the single version of it. Yeah. But you were there early on, the early iterations of that song.
So we're doing this demo, and this huge truck was reversing, and it was just like outside. There was no soundproofing, and you just had this
persistent, annoying sound
right in the middle of the bridge. And you just carried on singing, got to the end, and I just kind of looked at you like, I'm really sorry. And we just burst into laughter like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. And I'd had those kind of experiences that everybody does with like local bands, and they get all like uppity, like this isn't professional. And just a refreshing attitude that you had and between that and working on the other demos at the other studio, and then, going on the road with you, I just was like, oh, this is refreshing. It's okay. When you work with real people, genuinely talented people, It's actually a fun thing to do.
The thing about music is that it isn't having a pristine, perfect environment is actually almost counterintuitive to those of us who play music, if we were on a tour bus, like in a bunk or bouncing down a highway or in a closet or on the floor, sitting campfire style. Like it's just such an in the moment kind of experience, particularly singing and playing in a room with people. I mean, that's my favorite thing. Now with all the in-ear monitors and all the isolation that, the stage thing has become, it's less, in many ways, less what I crave. I crave that kumbaya, sitting and listening and smiling and seeing and hearing. Mm-hmm. And it's like you're all part of the same dance, the same tango, and you have to feel what each other is doing. So I like the roughness of that. I like the unpredictable, the truck backing up or the, what are you going to do? It's life, right? I'm remembering the tours. You did guitar teching for me.
I would say to people, take every opportunity you can. Especially, because I'd been in record deal after record deal, and then I started like that little studio. And I was making a few grand here and there. But when you said, do you want to come and do some shows of us? And you told me how much I was going to get paid. I was like, yep, I need to make a living.
I'm glad to know that we paid well.
Yeah, you did. Yes, you did.
I mean, that's always good. It always meant a lot to me. When we would tour, our touring group was not just the band. We were a family. Yeah, I always approached it that way. And everybody who worked, whether they were on the crew side of things or the people on the stage with instruments playing, to me, everyone was a family. And that's what made touring, which can be kind of rough, actually, if you don't have the sort of inner stamina to be living out of a hotel room and just not sleeping and, just this sort of Groundhog Day part of it where it's like, the alarm clock goes off. What city am I in? Where am I?
I also always appreciate how on it you were. I remember at the old place when we were doing all those demos. Well, there's a couple of things. All these memories are flooding back. Talking of dealing with, because people ask me all the time about how, when you're producing, how you work with artists. Well, for instance, do you remember we were recording those first demos on ADAT? All of you are playing in the live room, which was a rehearsal room, and there was this tiny little control room. And of course, in classic ADAT style, in the middle of the song, the ADATs went out of sync and stopped, and then magically seemed to carry on. So you all came in to listen. I'm like, well, there's a dropout for 10 seconds in the recording. And I think it was actually Debbie goes, "Oh, we're used to doing full band punch-ins. Remember that?" And you went back in and played the whole band. So with drums, bass, guitars, vocals, and just punched in the section.
And just punched it in. Yeah. I mean, no, I know.
It was funny. It was just fun. It's like, why does it have to be like, oh?
No, it doesn't have to be. And it shouldn't be.
You get used a lot for examples of like when you're dealing with real professionals, how, you have to let stuff just kind of wash off your back. One other thing I'll say, whether this stays in the thing, just because I want to tell you the story. Yeah. Working with Steven Tyler and Carrie Underwood.
Oh, wow.
And they were in there singing a duet, and Steven wanted to do the harmonies live with her. So they both got on the microphone singing together.
Yeah.
And they did the whole thing. We did a couple of takes, and she left. And then he turned to me and said, "Oh, by the way, only one side of the headphones was working." So the whole time he was tracking, he didn't make any kind of deal out of it whatsoever. He wanted the whole session to feel good. And he never once mentioned that only the left ear was working.
Wow. Yeah, because he's been doing it a long time. And also he has a level of confidence that in myriad situations, he can still do it. He can still have the confidence that like, I know what to do. That's the thing. I remember when my kids were sort of testing out doing bands and having bands, and there was some sort of like battle of the bands situation at a camp they were going to. And the thing that young bands never realize is that everything's going to go wrong. You're going to get up there, you're going to have no idea what you're hearing, what you're listening to, or if you can hear the people around you. Like, it's just a big cluster of noise, right? And it's just like every single time you walk onto a stage when you're on tour or at any venue, a small venue or a large venue, you just have to learn to roll with it. It goes back to the first thing we were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're recording. The last thing you want to do is like disrupt the whole recording session just for one thing and then make it about the problem rather than, the song, which you're there to serve the song.
Yeah, exactly.
That, and I always remember that you all of you used to call Walk Like an Egyptian, Walk Like a Beautician.
I didn't, but that's a funny memory. I mean, I don't recall doing that, but see, that's where you come in, Warren.
Might have been Vicky. I think it was Vicky that was calling it Walk Like a Beautician.
So. That could be. That sounds very Victoria. Yeah.
Are you a Los Angeles native?
I am.
So the Bangles is part of the Paisley Underground. Mm-hmm. Was it the first band that you had?
The Bangles are technically my second band. My first band was called The Unconscious, and it was with David Roback, who was in the Rain Parade, which was a seminal Paisley Underground band, but also went on to do Mazzy Star.
Of course.
The band Mazzy Star. So, and actually Hope Sandoval, the singer of Mazzy Star, was a very big fan when she was a teenager of all the Paisley Underground bands. And she and her friend Sylvia used to come and we'd sneak them in. They were underage at the various clubs around LA where the Paisley Underground bands were playing. And that included the Bangles. I went to UC Berkeley in the late 70s. And that's where kind of I saw this sort of tectonic shift from the sort of rock gods of Led Zeppelin and The Who and stadium shows to this sort of birth of the art band, Talking Heads, Patti Smith Group. And I saw the last Sex Pistols show. Turns out my friend Belinda Carlisle was at Winterland Ballroom at that gig too. And I saw Patti Smith Group at Winterland. Then David and I, who I'd grown up with and was a childhood friend, transferred to UC Berkeley. And there we began a relationship, both musical and a romantic relationship, in which we founded our first band, which we called The Unconscious. But there's a great record called the Rainy Day Record, which is a compilation that David produced and was this sort of guru behind. And it had a lot of the key players from the Paisley Underground contributing in vocals and playing. And, Mike Quercio was on there from the 3 o'clock playing bass, and members of the Rain Parade and so on. And so I did a couple songs. I did I'll Keep It With Mine, which is a Dylan song, but I thought it was a Nico song because I knew her famous Chelsea Girls record, that John Cale produced. And that was sort of my musical Bible at that time. Like, I revered that record. And then I also did I'll Be Your Mirror, which was a Velvet Underground song, Lou Reed song, which the Velvet Underground were also a huge influence on me. So a lot of these influences were kind of swirling around, sort of pre-Bangles. Although the Rainy Day record, the Bangles had already formed at that point. But that period in college, with the birth of the art bands, the goal wasn't to play a stadium. The goal was to get a gig at a club, and be like the Velvet Underground, at Andy Warhol's factory, and just be part of a happening. Like, for me, it was woven into my idea of just I wanted to be an artist. And I didn't have a lot of boundaries around that. I studied dance and theater, and I ended up graduating with a degree in art. Like, I painted, I made sculptures, I did photography, and I made a band. Like, the band was just another thing that I made. Yep. So David and I were, childhood friends. And then we had the romantic section period of the relationship. And then, he moved on and did his stuff. I moved on, put an ad in the Recycler magazine, which was for LA natives.
I remember the Recycler, yeah.
Yeah, you could buy a car, you could buy an old couch, or you could find a bandmate. So I had placed this ad, and it led me to Vicki and Debbie Peterson. And from that point forward, as soon as we met in my garage where I was living, I had like a little converted, which is also a very typical Angelino thing, to have park the cars on the street and make the garage the place where you hang out with your friends, or in my case, you throw a double mattress in there and you're sleeping in there, and you have band practice in there. So I met Vicki Peterson and Debbie Peterson on this fateful night, and I think it was the end of 1980 or the very beginning of 81, and we became a band that night.
Nice.
And it was that fast, which I sometimes look back and think, wow, that's like meeting someone on a blind date and then driving to Vegas and going to an Elvis chapel and getting married. And then you're married to them for 40 years. And here we are now. But it's all good.
What was the ad? Were you looking for other girls to be in a band, or was it just that they were girls? I mean, was it conscious?
It was conscious, actually, because after the sort of ABBA-esque experience of being in a band with your significant other, yep. I realized that brings complexities to the situation. Yes. And so though David and he actually passed away this year, it was very sad, but we have remained the closest of friends since our teen years, since middle school. But we did so many fun things together, and I like to think about that. And all through these years, he and I shared that love of music, and that first moment when you're like, I want to do it. Like, the courage to just say, to have this belief that you should try these things, you should follow a dream, And so I will always think about David when I think about the birth of my music life. And so at that point, the Bangles were technically my second band. But back to your question about being in a band with girls, I made these flyers, which I can send you so you can see what.
Oh, I'd love to.
I advertised something along the same verbiage in the Recycler, listing bands that were influences and so on. But I had put these flyers around LA, and I went to see the Go-Go's at the Whiskey, and I brought a stack of my flyers, and I kept putting them in the ladies' room because at that point I thought, you know what? This is a fantastic idea. We're not going to probably encounter the issues that I had, managing the ups and downs with a significant other. So actually I was looking to see if I could find like-minded, and because we were so young then, I always said, girls. I did. The flyer said, I want to start a boss all-girl band, was what it was, the sort of banner of the flyer that I put out.
And you still have a copy of that flyer?
I have the copies of all the original. I used to do all the original flyers for our shows. And they're all really cool collages, and
fantastic.
Because I was an art major, they're not exactly fancy, but they were cool. I think, looking back.
No, I believe it.
Pro.
So when did Michael come in?
Annette Zelinskis, who we've reunited with, actually answered my ad in The Recycler. And I met Vicki and Debbie through a circuitous path, but I actually met them through their roommate's ad. It's very long and complicated, not worth going into at the moment. But Annette was our original bass player.
Right.
But she had aspirations to do music, a different kind of music. So we parted ways just before, then Michael joined in 83, and then shortly thereafter, Columbia Records signed us.
What was the signing process in those days? Was it basically come and see you live? You did demos?
Well, yeah, that's always an interesting thing. When young musicians, I talk to them now, I always say, it only takes one record company, because no one was interested in us. And we frankly saw ourselves as like a garage band in the truest sense. Even if the internet existed, reality shows that were contest shows existed, I don't think we would have chosen that route. I think that the Bangles were born in the spirit of the art band, the sort of DIY way of doing things. And that was just kind of, I mean, the bands that we loved, the Zombies, the Beatles, the Stones, they all just met, and just came together out of this untamable passion for a very specific thing that was the essence of why should these 3, 4, 5 people come together in a room and get behind instruments and make noise? Like, why? Like, there's a chemistry, and beyond the chemistry, and especially being so young, we weren't really adults yet. We were just passionate. And so when I met Vicki and Debbie that night in the garage of my parents' house, I would say the obsession with the Beatles. Now we're talking about 1980. So we were like little girls who, as 5-year-olds knew the Beatles. The Beatles were my first musical crush, my first musical love. I have 2 brothers. We would pretend to be the Beatles. We would do that silly thing where you pick up a hairbrush and it's a microphone, that kind of thing. So when I met Vicki and Debbie, their crazy love for the Beatles, their crazy infatuation, and this is the 80s again, when new wave is happening, people aren't really talking about the Beatles as much at this point. And there's no streaming, there's no YouTube, everything is at everybody's fingertips now. So you would just hear whatever was on the radio. So it was quite profound, to be honest, that the passion that we shared with the Beatles. So that was sort of the kind of idea.
I do love some of my favorite new wave stuff from England actually has a lot of Beatles influence on it. Now, when you go back and listen to XTC from that period or Squeeze, I mean, Squeeze is just like all that songwriting is very Beatley, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And the great singing and the great melodic guitar parts, they're really like solos that you can sing.
Exactly.
Like, how you can kind of sing every George Harrison solo, and you can air drum Ringo's fills. That was the Beatles. Like the George Martin too. You have to think about like what a great fit that was as a producer for them.
I love a little bit of this nitty gritty. So had you done demos, and where had you done the demos?
Oh, the demos are cassettes, which I still have.
Wow.
So when Vicki and Debbie came over that day in the garage, I played them cassettes that I made with David Roback in Berkeley of I'll Be Your Mirror. All the Velvet Underground songs were on there. Debbie came with some drums and Vicki came with a guitar, and we set up mics, and they tease me about this to this day. I went up to the mic and I blew on the mic, and they laughed at me. They was like, she's so green. Like, she has never done this before. And I was like, not quite like that. Like, not with drums in the room. Like, right. David and I were like, just maybe a couple amps and the reverb turned all the way, but it wasn't like, they had been like in a working band since high school. They were playing high school parties, and they were really kind of their former band before we made a band doing that. So I was really inexperienced. And they taught me White Rabbit so that we could play one song that we all knew, but I didn't know it. I knew how to sing it, but I didn't know how to play it. And I thought, wow. And my mother had a friend staying over from New York, we had a house guest. We were in the garage and they were inside the house, but they could hear us because we were amplified. And the house guest said, how long have they been a band? And my mom said, they just met. They just met. And so that was a good sign.
A very good sign.
That was a good sign that we kind of like sat down to play and like it sounded like a band. So we took a while to get signed. Miles Copeland managed us. So he put out an EP on the tiniest sort of artsy subsidiary of IRS Records, which was Faulty Products. Great name. So
Faulty Products.
Faulty Products. And that's when we had to change our name from the Bangs to the Bangles, because there was a band in New Jersey, a boy band, and they were like, you're not allowed to use that name. So 2 days before the artwork for this EP, which the great Craig Leon, who had produced Ramones and Blondie, had done with us, we added the 3 letters to the Bangs. We made it the Bangles. We thought Bangles, Beatles, but we still weren't signed to a major label. And Miles was our manager, so like he had access to being able to help us get this EP out at least. And then it became kind of a, local underground radio happening EP.
But how did you get Miles, or how did Miles get you?
Miles came to one of our really down and dirty shows. I think it was at the Café de Grand when we were part of the Paisley Underground. And the Bangles always opened for everybody else. All the other bands were boys, and we were always the opener. And somebody says, oh, there's this guy over there named Miles Copeland. I had no idea who he was. I was living in the 60s in my head. I didn't really know about the Police, to be honest with you. I mean, kind of heard of them, but I wasn't like hip to the new sounds of the new wave. So I go up to Miles and I'm just like, I was treating him like, who the fuck are you? Like, you're not the most famous manager in the world, even though he kind of was. I was completely scrappy and just like, I wasn't intimidated. I was the opposite of intimidated. I just come off playing a set. So I had that, Warren, that endorphin rush where it's like, you could just rocket to the moon just on pure endorphins after a concert. I think it was Vicky and Debbie said, who you were just talking to? I said, who? Who was he? Because he's the manager of the Police, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so Miles was
His brother just happens to be the drummer, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't even know, which was a good thing. But one of the weird, interesting parts of the story, and it gets to your question, I know I'm going a long way around. We did a gig at Magic Mountain, which was like, there's that famous scene in Spinal Tap where they're all playing a gig like that and they're getting radio signal from like the Air Force Base or something. Do you know So Magic Mountain was kind of like just a strange gig, but there was this A&R guy who worked with Bruce Springsteen named Peter Philbin, who was sort of tiptoeing around kind of, I've heard about this all-girl band. Kind of 60s influence, a lot of 3-part harmonies. I think I'll drag Bruce Springsteen to Magic Mountain with me to see them and get his opinion on this band. So little did we know, as we're like thrashing around on stage, like grunge guitars with like 3- and 4-part harmonies over the like jangly 60s stuff we were doing. Bruce Springsteen was watching us. We had no idea. But we met him afterwards, and all I know is that's what flipped the switch to like, let's sign them. I mean, I don't know what he said exactly, but all I know is we got some kind of a thumbs up the fact that he came to see us at Magic Mountain is just astounding to me now.
It sort of speaks to a couple levels, doesn't it? The classic kind of A&R guy, what is the joke about how many A&R guys does it take to change a light bulb?
Well, apparently it only took Bruce Springsteen to change the light bulb.
Exactly.
He brought Bruce Springsteen.
Exactly.
And it was all, I'm probably fucking up the analogy completely.
No, but it makes sense. It's like the joke is like, I don't know, what do you think? They need somebody to tell them.
Yeah.
And that's what Bruce Springsteen did.
And all of a sudden we're on Columbia Records. It just was so cool for like a kid who revered 60s music to be on the label that Dylan was on, that Simon and Garfunkel were on. I mean, these were like heroes of mine. So then things started to take off, and that's the point at which, long way round to your question, Michael was in the band, I'm quite sure. at the point right around that time.
Who did your first album?
David Kahn did the first two, and David Kahn was in the A&R staff and very close with Peter Philbin, very close, and had come from doing loads of awesome new wave records in San Francisco. I always learn something when I work with anybody, but I learned a lot about arrangement, a lot, and from Craig Leon too. You know, all the producers I've worked with, you just learn stuff.
I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the Go-Go's and the Bangles. This is about 2 or 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And saying how the Go-Go's album was the first number one and then you were number two. And that was like such a big deal in the early 80s that these two, you know, all girl bands had a number one and number two album within a year of each other, and how groundbreaking. And it kind of scared me, like, why was that such a big deal? Why does that have to be a big deal in like 81, 82, 83?
There was definitely a funny fixation on the fact of our gender. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And as we've been talking about, if there's two girl bands, then let's make it a competition. Instead of like, where are all the other girls? Where are all the other women? I mean, we know they're out there. We know that there's so many incredible. I mean, look, in the 70s, when I was sitting in my room studying Joni Mitchell and Bonnie Raitt and Linda Ronstadt, it was funny. The other day, we were driving in the car and Joni Mitchell a song came on my son's playlist. And I said, you know, I taught myself how to sing just singing to this song. And I started to do it. And it was like, I knew it like, I could mimic it like a minor bird, you know, is that the bird that can learn
minor bird, yeah.
Like I like every nuance, like that's, so I
Which
grew
song?
up, I think it was California, because it has all these fluty high notes and it has all her jazzy rhythms and like, you know, I learned from those records. That's how I learned, and I would sing them over and over and over again until I could just mimic it. Yeah, that's how you learn, right? I'm sure you learn to play solos and guitar by playing along with your favorite records.
Oh, yes. I remember learning "'Cause We've Ended as Lovers" by Jeff Beck, like trying to get every bend and phrase and, you know, something that he was doing naturally. I was trying to mimic everything because I just wanted to have that same feel, you know. I understand entirely. And Joni is one a heck of an artist to want to be like. Whew.
Yeah, no, I know. It can be daunting, but it's also the challenge of it. Like when you're learning the Jeff Beck thing, it's like, he came to one of our shows. Actually, he and Sting showed up at a show once. That was, and it was at the Town and Country in London. Do you remember that venue?
Of course.
And it was a weird thing where this audience it was mostly boys, actually. I remember that. And there was this one girl I was worried about because it was like this seething crowd of humans that were pressing so packed to the stage. And this one, I was watching this little romance take place before my eyes of this boy meeting this girl who was getting kind of smushed and sort of rescuing her. And it played out the whole night. But the aftermath was amazing, which was like the whole venue cleared out and it was Sting and Jeff Beck. And at one point, I'm literally just kind of going, is this happening? Just sitting with our feet hanging off the stage, just me and Jeff chatting. And he's telling me about, like, he was fixing a car or something. He was just telling me about some cars that he likes to work on and just, you know, shooting the breeze with Jeff Beck. And it was just bizarre. I thought, am I dreaming? Or is this my life now? It was crazy. Oh my God.
Back at the old studio, my other studio you used to rehearse at, Swing House, Rick Rubin and Anthony Kiedis stood outside the door while Iggy was rehearsing like little kids. You got guys worth hundreds of millions of dollars waiting to speak to a guy that influenced all of us. You know, you talk about the Stooges and you were talking earlier about the Velvet Underground. I mean, these things are so important to us, but none of those artists made half the money of artists like that. But they would sound like little kids and can we meet Iggy? And we went in and said, Iggy, you know, Anthony Kiedis and Rick Rubin would like to meet you.
Oh my God.
Let's sort of flash forward.
So In Your Room was the Everything record. It was our third record. So we made this record with David Sigerson, who's incredible. Davitt was just so fun to work with. I had started writing with a really lovely writing team, Billy Steinberg and Tom Kelly, who I wrote Eternal Flame with. But we wanted to write a pop song, and I had heard the song Monet Monet by Tommy James and the Shondells, and I wanted a song like that. So I wanted to do like a classic 60s styled power pop song, but with a kind of, romantic lyric. And that's sort of what it became.
You just touched on Eternal Flame. Tell us a little about writing that. And had you at that point done many co-writes outside of the band, or?
Well, I had written a long time ago with David Roback. I'm trying to think, actually. I wrote a lot with Vicky, and then sometimes Debbie would write with us, and occasionally all four of us would write together. I'm thinking there was, what happened? I think by the time we got to the third album, everybody was sort of road weary. Well, you know what that's like. And everybody didn't want to be on the road all year and then be in a room writing. We needed some autonomy. We needed to get a little breather from each other. So everybody sort of ran and scattered to work with other people. And so that third album is comprised mostly of songs that we all co-wrote with other people. But I had, I think, already begun writing with Billy and Tom. This timeline is a little bit vague. They had written with Cyndi Lauper, and they had written a beautiful ballad with Cyndi. And I said, that is so gorgeous. I would love something in the vibe of that, just like a classic, beautiful love ballad. And I had just come back from being on tour. We had a show in Memphis. So of course, when you're in a band, it is essential that you visit Graceland. So we got the artist tour, which meant we had our own tour guide who took us through and brought us to little areas that, the general public was not allowed in, which we felt very special. But it was a really funny tour. Like when we went through the room with all the awards and costumes, I forget what they called it. It was a special wing. And they went and they showed all of his karate stuff. And there was a lot of black belts. And I said something like, was Elvis, was he a black belt? And the tour guide just said kind of no, they just gave it to him. I don't know if it's true. I have that memory. Done with the tour. I was recounting my visit to Graceland and the special tour that the Bangles got, and some of the fun moments of it. One of which was, I'm telling Billy that we went to the sort of garden where Elvis was buried, and they had his eternal flame, like it was meant to be an eternal flame, but it was raining. The flame was out. So I was telling Billy the story, but before I could even go on with the story, Billy said, "Eternal Flame." I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's a great name for a song." I went, "Oh, you're right. It is a great name for a song." And thus we sat there and we just wrote the lyrics. And then that's how I always did it with Billy and Tom. Billy would always start with the lyric. Then we drive over to Tom's studio, which is interesting because I always write the reverse.
Yeah.
When I'm writing myself, I pick up a guitar and I start singing. We go over to Tom's, and they knew this Cyndi Lauper song that I loved, and we just started writing it. But the real cool turn on the song was when we did the middle eight part, because it doesn't have a proper chorus. It's just sort of is this burning an eternal flame little tag of the verses is kind of the chorus, but it was this sort of left turn of the bridge of the middle eight that repeats with a guitar solo in between. That really was the moment where I kind of got chills, and I was like, yeah, this is so cool. It took almost like prog rock turn there. I'm a big fan of the song, the band Yes. So
when I hear that song, I always think of the Beatles, because every part of the song could be its own individual hook.
Yeah.
It starts off hooky. Everything about it is super hooky. When you think of what is it?
Here, there, and everywhere, or something like that.
Yeah, she's my little girl. She's so glad she's telling all the world.
Yeah.
And then And then the pre-choruses and the bridges in it could be choruses as well for somebody else's song. I think Eternal Flame has that about it. It gets frequently covered and turned into number ones like at least every 5 to 10 years.
Atomic Kitten, and then there's this wonderful new young artist called Griff, who, so they're amazing. She's amazing, and they did a gorgeous version of it. I was just blown away. Billy actually sent me the link, and I found it on the Instagram. And I was just like, it delights me no end when people do their versions of it and their interpretations. It's just like nothing is more exciting for me than to just see that happen. And or to hear stories of people from their lives. And like, I don't know, in the time when you're writing something, you're just working so hard on it, and you're hoping that the emotion that sort of you're trying to express someone will get it, like that's the whole thing. Like, I feel this thing and I want to explain it. Like, I just think that's the great beauty about music. It's like, it's a way to say something to someone that you wouldn't necessarily go up to someone and tell them in the real world. It's like the mixtape thing, like, listen to the songs on this. That's what I feel about you. You know what I mean? Like, that music serves so many purposes in life. It gives voice to things we might not say to someone because we let the song do it. And that's why they get played at weddings. And so it touches me deeply when people say, this song meant this and to me and that song in particular, it always just almost like makes me want to cry. I'm feeling that now, like how moved I've been with the stories that I've gotten that people have told me about what that song has meant to them in their personal lives, like with their families and spouses and children and whatnot. It's just amazing. Was
there anybody in mind that came to you? What, from the lyrics, from your perspective, what were you thinking about at the time? That's
hard for me to go back and remember exactly. And it's so weird that it started with me recounting, our tour of Graceland, and that it morphed into this other thing, but it quickly did. One thing that has been throughout my entire life, and we were kind of touching upon it, is that music is this kind of magical concoction between melodies and words, and then voices and instrumentation to kind of replicate an emotion, if you will. I mean, and so I think the fact that I've always been an emotional person and that music has always been like a friend or like a source of courage or a source of expression or that thing that I like to feel. I like to cry in movies. I like to be moved. And so I think for me, when I was working on Eternal Flame with Billy and Tom, it was about just the giant, ocean of a lifetime of that for me. It was like it had a kind of smallness to it. It's a little delicate little thing. But the thing driving it was this bigger sense of like, I want to sing it to everybody I've ever loved. It could be a child, or it could be a parent, or it could be a lover, or it could be a friend. I wanted it to work. For me, I wanted it to track back to all of those different kinds. I think you
achieved that. That is the sense I've always got from that song, that it is about just a greater love.
Yeah.
And once you become a parent, it all sort of makes sense, doesn't it?
Oh, Yeah.
I would say the only unconditional love is parent to child.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that was the Cyndi Lauper song, which I ended up covering. That was the song. So this is incredible that you just said those words, unconditional love, because I think, which I ended up covering on my first solo record, I think Billy and Tom played me Cyndi had written that with them. And that was like, that is so beautiful. I want to write something like that. So yeah, you just without knowing it, reminded me of which song it was.
Now, I don't think any interview with you could probably go without me asking about Manic Monday, because I'm sure everybody's, I know the story goes that Prince saw you live in LA and then sent you a cassette of 2 songs. That's the wanting you to cover them or hoping you would cover them. Is that largely true?
Actually, what the weird kismet and synchronicity of it was that the week that I heard a Prince song for the first time, which was When Doves Cry, because I was very late to the party, he saw the Bangles' Hero Takes a Fall on MTV, the video. He really liked that song, which made me feel really good because Vicki and I had written it, and it was it was a sort of a turning point song for us in our writing relationship, Vicki and me. Then he started showing up. That's right. He came to the Palace. I got word like Prince is here to see you guys. And then, all of a sudden he's just on the stage. And I've actually never been in the presence of that sonic magical thing that was happening when he played guitar ever since. And I doubt I will ever in my life. I mean, it was like the guitar was part of his body. I mean, he was channeling a musicality from the inside out. It was all improv. It was just, well, you saw the solo at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So you know what I'm talking about. It was supernatural, honestly, the way that he performed. And then cut to, we're in the studio doing our next record, which would have been the Different Light record. And he's in the studio doing his at Sister Studios, Sunset Sound. And we're at the sister studio, Sunset Sound Factory. But we're working with a husband and wife engineers. Peggy Leonard is working at Sunset Sound with Prince, and David Leonard is working with the Bangles at Sunset Sound Factory. And I'm told to go drive over to Sunset Sound that Prince has a song for us. So I get in my car, my really, really crappy car with ripped upholstery and just horrible. Drive over there, and I'm so nervous and excited. And he's singing at the time of recording, so they had just the cassette waiting. I was really hoping to see him and chat with him about it, but got in my car, drove back to a few miles across town, back to the Sunset Sound Factory. We all hover around a cassette player, and I still have the actual cassette. I retrieved it from my storage. I had a little storage unit with all the old cassettes in it, and I found it. The very one. But we listened to it, and it was like, the Cinderella slipper thing where it's like, it just fit. Like the minute I started singing it, I was like, oh, it feels so good. When you play something or sing something, like sometimes you love a song and you try to sing it and you're like, this is hard. I can't do it. That one was just like the minute it came out, I went, oh yeah, this is going to work. And I got the chills. Anyway, it just went from there. We recorded it. We knew he had heard it. I think it was already being played on the radio, or maybe it hadn't come out yet, but the door to the rehearsal room at one of the places in the valley where we used to rehearse at just opens, and there he was. And we're like, first of all, we didn't have a keyboard player. We didn't have anybody playing the little Baroque riff. And we played it for him, and he liked it. He went with the whole thing. He was really, really, really genuinely happy. So I was ecstatic. I was like, Prince likes what we did with his song. Yay. And the truth is, with all this perspective in my life now, like, it does make me emotional. I'm really, really sorry that I didn't have a chance to thank him as an adult. Like, we were kids. We were maybe 7 months. He was maybe 7 months older than me or something like that. But we were like kids when we knew each other then. And I just didn't ever expect him to not be here for the time that I thought, you know what, I'm in Minneapolis. I'm going to just like get up the nerve and figure out how to send him a note, or, so many times I wanted to do that and I didn't. And I really, really regret it.
I can imagine.
But I honestly, what a gift. And he didn't even credit himself with it. He used the name Christopher. People soon found out that it was his song, but he just gave it to us. He just liked us. He liked the band. I don't know.
Friends of mine who work with him have got all kinds of crazy stories about him.
Oh, I'm sure.
But I did hear a story from a friend. I won't say who it is because I'd be outing them, that he went around to one of an ex-band members of his. I won't say who it is, and gave them a house.
Oh my gosh!
Like he did his inexplicable kind of. If he took a liking, and that's obviously what happened.
I mean, there was a time where we just got a call. You're invited over to the house that he's staying in or owns. I don't know, and we went over and we spent some time with them. And he said, "Let's go to Sunset Sound and just let's jam." And we were like, okay. We went over there and he had his studio all set up. And we thought, oh, what are we going to do? Well, he wanted to play Bangles songs. He wanted to play our songs. We just stayed up till 3 a.m. playing our songs with him. It was crazy. But, this is not a crazy story for people who had the great fortune of being in his orbit or being in a room with him, he loved music. I'm very lucky for that gift of Manic Monday. I really, truly am.
There was a period I remember when we were working together. I remember what was the band called? Ming
Tea?
Ming Tea, that was it.
That was my band with Mike Myers and Matthew Sweet.
And Matthew Sweet. And we were watching Austin Powers the other day with my kids. And off you come, up you come, and it's great watching those because I can see sort of almost full circle, because then you get to be like psychedelic pop star. You're almost sort of going back to your roots.
I was Gillian Shagwell. That was my character. Mike named me. Yeah. I know. Well, that was great fun. That was when my husband's directing career was just starting to take off, and he got the job of directing Austin Powers and Matthew Sweet. I've collaborated a lot with Matthew Sweet. He's like the power pop genius of all time. And he had a show at McCabe's, one of my favorite local places to play. And Jay and Mike were kind of cooking up, sort of the vision for what Austin Powers was going to be, never knowing that at that point that it would be a trilogy. But I said, Mike, you got to check out Matthew Sweet, because he wasn't familiar with his music. And so I brought him to the show, and we all went out to dinner afterwards. And then we just, for funds, decided to start a band. And we watched this cool 60s Italian sort of sci-fi thriller movie called The 10th Victim that Mike was obsessed with. And it was sort of in the kind of canon of movies that Austin Powers was sort of referencing, in terms of style and color palette and, vibe that they were trying to go for. And so we just decided to form, the name Ming Tea is a reference to something in the movie, The 10th Victim. So we started to jam, Matthew and Mike and me, and little known fact, but Mike is a fantastic musician, like a drummer, a bass player, he can play everything. So we came up with this idea, and we just started to play a few gigs around town as Ming Tea and, dress the part. And we did some music for the Austin Powers films, and yeah.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I have an album of songs just about finished. I've got to put a few more vocals on it, and I'm writing, and I've stumbled upon an album that I recorded in 1999 with some amazing musicians. And it's just a sort of lost, sort of buried treasure album that just, in a weird synchronous moment, some of the people that I made this record with all got in touch with each other in the last few weeks. And I think even before the record that I'm just wrapping up and doing the final vocals on comes out, I think this lost treasure from 1999, we're going to try to get it out as soon as possible. So there'll be a lot of new music from me coming up very, very shortly.
Fantastic. And the Lost album is the one you did with Dan Schwartz?
Yes.
Amazing. I love Dan. He's a great.
That's right. Because I said I was doing your show today. Yes.
Yeah.
With Bill Bottrell, Dan Schwartz, Dylan O'Brien, Charlotte Caffey. We have a song on there. Incredible cast of musicians and songwriters. And it's a beautiful, beautiful record. And somehow life intervened and I did some Bangles stuff, and the album just has been literally sitting there for 20 years. And we all kind of just woke up one day and went, I just listened to it again. I was like, we've got to put this out ASAP. So we're in the process of that. That's
amazing. Well, maybe when that comes out, we'll do a little interview with you and Dan. You can talk about maybe
that would
a bit
be
of
amazing.
Reminiscing. I love Dan. He's a real sweet guy, an amazing bass player.
Amazing.
Yeah.
He did a great guitar solo on one of the songs, and he was
beautiful. He
shared with me, we both have kids, our older kids are the same age, my Jackson and his Claire. And he was sharing with me his daughter's, very enthusiastic response to this Lost album. And in it, Dan pointed out that he played the guitar solo on one of the beautiful song that Dylan and I wrote. And he was just sharing this adorable text message of his daughter saying, "That's a great solo, Dad." And that you should play. Lovely. You should play guitar more. And Dan just wrote back something, yeah, but I love the bass. And that just touched me somehow, because Dan loves the bass. He loves it. And the bass is such a critical instrument. Hey, Paul McCartney played bass. I sometimes think people are so, enamored of a guitar solo that they forget some of the bass stuff. So I loved both sides of that Dan did this spectacular thing and his daughter was going crazy over it, and he's like, yeah, but I love the bass. It was just a cool moment. It was a very Dan moment.
Thank you ever so much. This has been such a pleasure. So much fun to catch up
and
some reminiscing and just, hearing a bit more about your journey, filling in some pieces. Thank you ever so much. Please leave some comments and questions below. Sue, you absolutely rock.
You rock.